Welcome to episode 124 and year two of Think Big with Michael Zellner, powered by Platinum Jewelers. As most of you know, I took a little bit of time off, but for a little while, but I'm super excited to get going again. And I'm very honored to have as my guest today on part one of his interview series with him, Richard Gage. Richard Gage, AIA, is an architect of 30 years from San Francisco Bay Area. He is a member of the American Institute of Architects and the founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He, along with his courageous wife and his assistant, Gail, continues to lead the charge toward a real investigation into the destruction of all three World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11 at richardgage911.org. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center high-rises after hearing the startling conclusions of reluctant 9/11 researcher David Ray Griffin on the radio back in 2006, which launched his own underlying quest for truth about 9/11. The organization he founded, AE 9/11 Truth, now numbers more than 3,500 architects and engineers, demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all three World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. As an architect, he has worked on most types of building construction, including numerous fireproof steel frame buildings. Most recently, he worked on the construction documents for a $400 million mixed-use urban project with 1.2 million square feet of retail, parking structure, and mid-rise office space altogether, and about 1,200 tons of steel framing. Please welcome Richard Gage, AIA architect. Richard, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Awesome to be here with you.
I appreciate your time. I know you're extremely busy. You know, Richard, I first became familiar with you when I saw you on Patrick Bet-David's podcast on Facebook earlier this year. And that piqued my curiosity. It got me to follow up and watch on TV your 2012 documentary, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. You know, I watched it with my mom, and I did that purposely because my mom is very, very skeptical person and everything. And we couldn't believe what we were hearing and seeing. And by the end, we were stunned, and everything you went through made complete sense to us both. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of what you're going to, do today is you're going to go through a presentation of what really happened, back on that Tuesday, back in 2001. Richard has a lot of information. He has some slides and different presentations to share with the audience today. It's going to be pretty awesome for you to see. And I ask everybody as they watch us to really keep an open mind, because my mind was open when I watched what I saw on not only on the podcast, but on television. And I was just, like I said, I was completely floored. And this leads me to my first question for you as we get started today. How has your research impacted your personal and professional life over the last 17 years or so?
Well, I would have to say that the 9/11 research, which I began, as you mentioned, in 2006, has completely changed my life. I started the organization itself in 2007, and then got an invitation to tour Europe. And the employment that I had at the time, working on this large project, 1,200 tons of fireproof steel framing in Las Vegas, that firm was concerned about my increasing participation in the 9/11 activities, and I was doing lots of radio interviews and local speaking engagements. And so they said, look, if you're going to go to Europe, we're going to need to get somebody else. We really value your employment here on these large projects. But so I made a decision at that point. I'm going to have to start an organization and support myself, because this is extremely important. We've uncovered the crime of the century here. We were all scammed. A huge, massive lie, a psychological operation, a false flag operation against the American people. designed to get us into wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Complete manipulation. I got real angry when I saw this interview with Ray Griffin, who was giving this evidence that we're going to be talking about today. So, yeah, it impacted my work completely. My marriage at the time also, because while my wife understood the evidence to some extent and believed that I needed to be doing what I'm doing, she could not live with it. So there went a perfectly good marriage also. Yeah, it impacted my life.
Big time, definitely.
At this point, I should say my current wife, we've been together 7 years altogether, and she's an angel. Completely stepped up to the plate to help me in every way she can. And we're a team now, and we go around the country and out of the country to give presentations, make educational outreaches at conferences with our evidence booth, providing our DVDs and our best answers to questions that come up all the time. So we're having a really good time doing a very important work.
Well, it's wonderful that you found someone, to do that with you and, to be your partner and life partner and also work partner too.
Yeah. Gail is fantastic.
That's wonderful.
Are you shopping for a new watch, an engagement ring, any kind of jewelry at all? What's up, Memphis? This is Jaren Jackson Jr. from the Grizzlies, encouraging you all to shop where I shop, Platinum Jewelers here in Memphis. Platinum Jewelers has a big selection of earrings, stockable rings, luxury watches, necklaces, bracelets, really whatever you need. 9387 Poplar next to Fresh Market in Germantown. So if you need anything jewelry related, go to my spot, Platinum Jewelers.
Let's start with building seven, because whether most people know it or not, a lot of what, you're going to talk about today starts there. There was an official story that we were told about what happened with building 7. I'm going to go ahead and let you go from there. I've shared the screen with you and everything, let you take over because you have so much extensive research and show what really truly happened.
Oh, you bet. Let's jump right into it then, because most people don't know about Building 7. And we feel it's important to at least give people a choice by looking at the evidence. Until they actually look at the evidence, they don't have a choice. We don't want people to be the last to know about this third tower that came down on 9/11. Most architects and engineers know nothing about the third worst structural failure in modern history. Nothing. And yet it should have been the most studied building failure ever. No plane hit this building.
Right.
And yet it came down anyway. So we're making a film to talk about this building as well as the Twin Towers. And we're in the middle of that project right now. This Building 7 was 47 stories. About a football field in length away from the Twin Towers, part of the complete World Trade Center complex, though, developed by Larry Silverstein in the 80s. And it was only half the height of the Twin Towers, which were the tallest buildings in the world at the time. What happened to the Twin Towers that morning did not happen to Building 7, but it did get hit by some of the debris that fell on it. There were some fires that were started. The building stood just fine when the towers fell. It had some damage. NIST considered this to be minor damage, at least an insignificant factor in the cause of this building's collapse. But here it is, standing just fine in the distance, following the towers. But about 7 hours later, after witnesses heard explosions, this happens to the building. The east penthouse drops first in an isolated event, and then 6 seconds later, the overall building drops suddenly, uniformly, and symmetrically into its own footprint. Now, we've all seen this before, right? This
Yes,
is
sir.
like the old hotels in Las Vegas, where they bring them down with controlled demolitions. So this is the operating theory among firefighters and others. But NIST came up with a theory 7 years later, because they've been fumbling this football for that long. And here is their conference that they had explaining what they want us to believe happened to this building.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. Okay, well, let's look at those fires. If that's true, these are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in the building. They are few, they are small, they are scattered, and they are burned out in the area of concern by NIST in the northeast section of floor 12. They've burned out in that area and they're moving toward the west here. Let's go back to Shyam Sunder for more detail.
Our study has identified thermal expansion as a new phenomenon that can cause the collapse of a structure. For the first time, we have shown that fire can induce a progressive collapse.
Okay, so for the first time ever, fire has produced a progressive collapse in a steel frame, fire protected high rise.
And you can see on the screen, the column at the very right is column 79. And that's the column that first buckles, causing the floors to come down, followed by a quick succession of failures of adjoining columns.
Okay, so they have this elaborate theory that says, tries to explain away the significant, overwhelming structural robustness of the steel members in this building. Absolutely incredible how this building came down in 6 seconds when no fire ever has brought down a steel frame fire protected high rise. Not these buildings, not a 62-story building burning 3.5 hours over 5 floors, or 18 hours over 8 floors in Philadelphia, or 17 hours over 26 floors in Caracas, Venezuela. Let me get my other screen up here for me. There we go. And you need to be over here. So not even since 9/11 have we had one of these extremely hot, large, and long-lasting fires in steel frame fire protected buildings. Have they come down? Not before, not since. But on 9/11, we lost not one, but 3 steel frame fire protected buildings. So we have to look at and see if there any comparison to the features of controlled demolition exhibited by those old hotels in Las Vegas, for instance, i.e., is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, let's go to Dan Rather on CBS and listen to his narration and watch for ourselves. And look at the suddenness of this destruction.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What did he say? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. Well, that's Dan using his intuition, as we all should. But we've been taught not to. We've been taught to, in a state of fear, be given what we're told we're seeing. We're seeing an orange, but it is an apple. And this is what has been happening to us in this society for quite a while now, particularly in the last 3 years with regard to the scamdemic. So, which we'll get to in another episode. Do we have a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's own footprint? Hey, let's look at the collapse from West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How does that happen? How do you bring a building down symmetrically into its own footprint and into its the center of the pile is in the center of the building's footprint? It's incredible. How do you do that? Well, you have to take out all the core columns at once within a fraction of a second of each other, followed by the perimeter columns about a second later. That pulls in the interior and then pulls the exterior on top of it. So you get that haystack type pile rather than tipping over, because that's what a building would do if there was any problem in the precision of these columns being removed. Do these fires have that capability to bring that building down into its own footprint, when never in history have fires brought a steel frame fire protected building down? Take a look on the left. We have building 7. On the right, a series of controlled demolitions. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never brought down a steel frame fire protected building? Shouldn't it have been the first hypothesis examined by NIST rather than the last one, in which 11 years later they establish a very frequently asked questions webpage on their website because they were hounded by questions on controlled demolition? Well, controlled demolitions would have sounds of explosions. Did NIST find any witnesses of sounds of explosions?
We did not find any evidence that explosives were used in the collapse of Building 7. We ran down detailed computer simulations of blast scenarios. This size blast would have produced an incredibly loud sound that was not recorded on videos of the collapse nor reported by witnesses.
No? Well, let's listen to a few of them.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. We were in shock, and then the worst part.
Wow. How about this gentleman, Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic?
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
And this gentleman.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
A big flash too? And this gentleman, Barry Jennings, who, along with Mayor Giuliani's attorney, Michael Hess, had been called to an emergency meeting on the 23rd floor where the bunker was in this building, which was designed to manage a major crisis such as this. But the building had been evacuated after the first plane hit the tower. And they didn't know that. They got there late. They got up to the 23rd floor. It was empty. They were told to get out of the building. On their way down, they experienced this.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What sort of sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs in that building. Bombs like this heard in the late morning of 9/11 in that vicinity.
Yeah, here's one of the guys. He can tell you I'm okay. All right. Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
We're told by NIST that these sounds were the sounds of one floor falling on another. There's no collapse at that particular time in the late morning. The towers had already come down. So what this corroborates Barry Jennings and Michael Hess's testimony. Well, let's look at the evidence of extreme heat. I mean, what could be causing this kind of destruction? Well, one structural engineer says, I saw melting of girders at the World Trade Center. This is WTC-7 steel he's studying. Well, wait a minute. Girders don't melt until 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. So what do we have going on here? Not even jet fuel melts girders. It only burns at about 600 degrees Fahrenheit, according to ME Petroleum. And of course, no plane hit this particular building. Steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures, says Jonathan Barnett, the author of the FEMA report. But we have a problem. It takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel, 2,800 degrees to begin to melt it. Yet molten steel was found at the World Trade Center, according to Mark Loiseau, president of Controlled Demolition, Inc., hired for the Building 7 cleanup, interestingly. Well, FEMA documents a metallurgical examination in their final report, which they completed in May of 2002, the Building Performance Assessment Team report on the destruction. And what do they find? Never before observed eutectic reactions, intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like we see in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel. Steel is not flammable in office fire conditions. It doesn't begin to melt until 2,800 degrees, twice what most office fires ever get to be. Most office fires, in fact, don't get past 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Yeah. So where's all this heat coming from? They document rapid oxidation, sulfidation, liquid iron, that's molten iron, and sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. So they're very clear about this. In fact, it's perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, according to the New York Times. And yet it was completely omitted from the NIST report when they published their report years later. And they claim, well, we couldn't test Building 7 for any steel because no steel was recovered, no steel identified, and we couldn't positively identify steel. But wait a minute. That very piece of steel provided to FEMA, put in their metallurgical examination in 2002, was found by John Gross, the co-project leader of the NIST report, which threw out that complete report when they took over the investigation and produced their own report without any of this evidence. Their shadow is all over it. So what can cause extreme temperatures capable of melting steel? Well, hydrocarbons, which is buildings and jet fuel, only produce temperatures 600 degrees, maybe 1400 degrees. But steel had definitely melted during the event. In fact, we see it pouring out of the material held in the claws of the excavator. We can tell by the color of molten metal like iron and steel what its temperature is. We're clearly exceeding 2800 degrees here, 2500 within the bright yellow. So again, jet fuel and fires are way down here at the bottom of this scale. So what is going on here really? What caused the steel or iron to melt? Well, we have a few clues. Let's look at one of them. Is there any evidence of incendiaries? Thermite, to be exact, and more particular, we look at what the U.S. Geological Survey found in all of their studies of the dust, they called it, pulverized concrete powder is what it really is. We'll come back to that. But they produced this particle atlas in 2005. What did they find? Billions of previously molten iron microspheres. Billions of them. Well, let's unpack this. This is an incredible find. Up to 6% of these samples are previously molten iron microspheres. We're talking about 4 tons altogether of this material. About 6% of many of these samples are composed of this material. They don't know where it comes from. Well, it's previously molten, meaning 2800 degrees minimum to melt steel. Iron, that's elemental iron. That's what we haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years or so. It's not steel, it's elemental iron. And we have spherical. Well, how does it get spherical? Well, molten materials, aerosolized liquids, in fact, form themselves into spheres by surface tension, like raindrops. Those are spherical. And they cool and they fall. Well, here's an experiment. We can actually see it ourselves, a small amount of thermite producing thousands of what look like sparks, but are molten iron. They cool and fall in the pan as spheres. That's how spheres are created by aerosolized liquids. You can make your own thermite in your backyard with you can make thermite. Yes, you can buy it on eBay. It's essentially iron oxide and aluminum powder. You can put it in a shaped cutter charge, which you can make in your own backyard, as John Cole, civil engineer, did, and you can get results like he did also. Notice it's more of a strong fizz rather than an explosive. Thermite works by means of heat, and heat that in this case cut almost completely through this particular welded joint. So what else was found in the World Trade Center dust? If that was evidence, and we'll find that it is, of ignited thermite incendiaries, is there any evidence of unignited thermite incendiaries also in the World Trade Center dust? Well, a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen are sent independently collected samples, 7 in all, like this one from Jeanette McKinley's apartment across the street from the South Tower. And they do some analysis on these, and they find, my gosh, these look like paint. They're primer paint, in fact. But they are attracted by a magnet. So they have a high iron content. Fascinating. What's iron doing in all this paint? To the point where it's attracted by a magnet. They zoom in and analyze the red layer with X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, XEDS. What do they find? Iron oxide and aluminum powder. Iron oxide and aluminum, the ingredients of thermite. What is the ingredients of thermite doing in all of these red grade chips that they were sent independently collected? They get real curious. They zoom into the red layer 50,000 times with a nuclear microscope. What do they find? Nano-sized particles of iron oxide and aluminum powder. These particles, iron oxide crystals, rhomboidal shaped, flat aluminum platelets, are 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair.
Wow.
These are extremely sophisticated materials made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. I mean, look, they're set in a matrix, a bed of oxygen, silica, and carbon. This is organic material. Organic material is what's added to TNT to make it expand rapidly and knock things over. That's how you do high energy explosives. So here we have an incendiary iron oxide and aluminum powder mixed with organic material to become more explosive. Well, what happens when they ignited one of these chips? They produce molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found in all the World Trade Center dust by the U.S. Geological Survey and R.J. Lee Group, another environmental consulting firm. So you see, we have an internally consistent set of repeatable, self-corroborating data that could be used in a court of law to bring real justice and real accountability to the real perpetrators of 9/11. As if we didn't know where these spheres came from. They're found attached to partially ignited red gray chips, as we see here and here. You see, when you get particles that small, the surface volume increases exponentially. So you have virtually instantaneous chemical reaction, i.e., more explosive. This is some of the most sophisticated materials around, and it's not made in a cave in Afghanistan. It was developed by Lawrence Livermore Lab for military use. So this is all documented in a 24-page peer-reviewed paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal. They conclude that the red layer of the red-gray chips is active, unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive. So, yes, this is available. You can download it right now from our website, richardgage911.org, and you can find it on the internet, active thermitic materials in the World Trade Center dust. So FEMA, before this report came out, FEMA had their own conclusion way back in 2002. Further investigation and research are needed to resolve how Building 7 came down. But that research was just done. So we have also the evidence to look at, don't we? Wasn't it saved? No. In easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history, we have 400 truckloads a day, starting just 2 weeks after 9/11, carting the steel to the landfill and sent to China for recycling. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene. They did not want to keep it around. Oh, I got to get rid of that slide, don't I?
Yeah, I remember you talking about that in the documentary about it going to China. It was just like unbelievable.
Yeah. It is amazing. So this is the reason we have 3,500, 3,600 now architects and engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation. And the reason that we are bringing this information to a special grand jury through a federal judge. And this film is not just an update of the film we made 10 years ago called 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, in which we've assembled 24 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all bringing this evidence. Well, we got 24 more experts this time, and we're partnering with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry to bring legal action with this evidence in its 60 exhibits, which have already been turned over and submitted as a petition for a special grand jury investigation to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan by litigation director Mick Harrison of the Lawyers Committee. And now we're going to a federal judge. And this film documents and updates all of the evidence and gives legal analysis and advice from the Lawyers Committee to the grand jury. Who might they subpoena to get more information? How do they treat this evidence with respect to their duties and obligations and opportunities as a special grand jury? So yeah, that's what I wanted to bring to your attention today and the attention of our viewers. We'll come back and look at next time the Twin Towers evidence, because there's a whole lot to look at there.
I'm sure, we'll talk about this in part two, but how do you respond to skeptics, who try to argue that, as I know you've probably heard so many times, the buildings, and you just went through it and explained how that's not possible, but they want to argue with you that it was caused by fires and, the planes hitting it and all the stuff that, how do you respond to these skeptical people?
Well, first of all, I remind them that in all likelihood, they have not seen the evidence. In the case of Building 7, we just went through about 25% of the evidence because we don't want it to be long and boring on a podcast.
Right.
But we have a whole lot more evidence in our 3 webinar series at the website, richardgage911.org. And that's the first thing I remind them and the people who I have access to, who they are trying to convince, that you have to see the evidence. It's overwhelming, irrefutable, and dispositive. So I argue with them by pointing out the evidence as we have just done here. So if they have seen the evidence, I offer to debate them publicly. We have several debates which we've done with skeptics, and we present the evidence and they present their straw man arguments and their accusations and their name calling, conspiracy theorists and all of that. And we just let the public make up their own mind about what they believe after that. See, before they see the evidence, they don't have an informed opinion. They're
Right.
just spouting what they believe in their head. And that doesn't work in reality or in science. That's not how we do science. After you look at this evidence, you have an informed opinion, as you did after looking at the Patrick Bet David podcast, where I didn't even have the opportunity to present, other than showing Building 7 going down, the graphic evidence like we did today.
If I remember correctly, didn't Donald Rumsfeld, wasn't it the day before 9/11 that he got up there and gave a speech about a lot of money that was missing or something that happened?
Yeah, he said he was starting a war on waste. And yeah, he said $2.3 trillion was unaccountable in the Pentagon budget. Whoa, wait a minute. Over like decades, that's a lot of money, right?
Right.
No matter how you look at it. Well, the Defense Naval Intelligence was the department of the military that was examining where that $2.3 trillion was. Do you know who got taken out on 9/11? The Defense Intelligence Agency.
Wow.
So they took out this plane that was coming into the Pentagon. Doesn't come right down on top of Donald Rumsfeld's office. No,
Sure.
It does a 330-degree turn, spiraling, dropping 8,000 feet per minute in a maneuver more associated with a fighter jet, and coming right straight into the Defense Intelligence Agency. And some argue that no plane hit the Pentagon, and maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But those are the ones who were killed.
Right.
And who was flying that plane, by the way? Hani Hanjour, who failed Cessna flying school. Pretty incredible what they tried to produce here. Most 9/11 researchers argue that this plane was remotely guided with technology that was available at the time.
As I said at the beginning, Richard, I was so intrigued after watching you on Patrick Bet David's podcast. I decided to know more. So I watched that documentary that you just mentioned, about the explosive evidence, the experts speak out. And after doing, so much more research on you and what you've been doing now for 17 years, you're an extremely just courageous man. Because I cannot even begin to imagine all the backlash that you received over the years and much more. I think that I really believe that a big reason many people just want to believe everything they're told on television is the truth. It makes them, much easier for them to live their lives, the way that they do, unfortunately. And we're told there's so many events that we've been told about. I think this goes all the way back to as far, before my life began, that I can remember, to JFK. And I'm sure it was before that are either half truths or just completely outright lies.
Yeah, it is so true. And you mentioned JFK. He turned down Northwoods, which was a secret project put forth to him by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a project operation to fly a civilian aircraft and have it be shot down, killing students as a pretext to go to war and invade Cuba and be done with that communist regime.
Right.
Well, he said this would start or could start World War III. So he turned that down. And of course, he was an anathema to the establishment for a number of other reasons.
Right.
But that was a clear example of a false flag operation like 9/11, where we have all kinds of evidence of foreknowledge of the event because it was planned well in advance. So Yeah. That is an important piece of history to be kept closely associated with 9/11.
Absolutely. Once again, I want to make sure you mention, how can people find you online and your website and everything, and get more information? Obviously, you're going to come back for part 2, but if they want to research more in between too, how can they find your website and more information about what you're doing with this movie?
Yeah, surprise, surprise. Here it is here. Richard Gage, 911.org. And we encourage people to look at the film that we're making. There are little pieces of it on our website you can find, and co-produce with us the film. We are still raising funds to make the movie, and so we encourage you to support that effort by co-producing the film. Your name is in the credits with a $500 donation toward the co-production of the film.
Very nice. Once again, I'd like to thank a sponsor of Think Big with Michael Zellner, Platinum Jewelers, which is located here outside of Memphis in Germantown at 9387 Poplar Avenue. And Richard, I know you're extremely busy. You do a lot of interviews. I've watched many of them on YouTube and different social media platforms, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show today. So I really look forward to having you back on for part 2 soon.
Thank you, Michael. It's my honor. It's going to be fun.
Thank you so much.
Get into it.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, sir.